Don't wear the uniform this time. It's not a funeral." That's what my sister told me before her engagement party, her voice dripping with the same condescension I'd known my whole life. I stayed quiet, as always, until the moment came when her fiancé looked straight at me and called me Colonel. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. What happened next tore the perfect image of my family apart forever. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Rain quit as I stepped out of Asheville Regional, yet the air gripped me, thick and sticky, the way a stubborn memory clings. The sky wore wet concrete, and the old pickup by the curb carried a decade of road dust, like it hadn't seen soap since Lana's Sweet 16. No one waited beside it. The engine idled and a cracked window sat rolled halfway down. I let myself in. Gasoline and chewing gum hung in the cab. The driver stayed silent, tapped the wheel twice, and eased us from the curb the moment it latched. The road home hadn't changed. Same trees, same gas station with one flickering light, same mailbox shaped like a black Labrador holding a fishing pole. But somehow the quiet cut sharper. Every turn drove me further into a place I'd learned to navigate, with a shut mouth and squared shoulders. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Mom opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes darted down to the muddy hem of my pants and then back up, nowhere near my face. "Boots off in the laundry room," she said, moving aside. I stepped in. The house smelled like boiled carrots and something fried too long. Dad was in his chair, remote in hand, feet propped on the ottoman like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't left this house swearing I'd never walk back through that door. He didn't look up. Still buried in Army paperwork? Something like that. I skimmed the photo wall on the stairs. Lana's face in 5 different dresses. Lana and Damien on a boat. Lana holding a trophy. No trace of my commissioning. No frame with my fatigues. Nothing of Kabul. Nothing of me. There was an empty nail between Lana's graduation and her engagement shoot. I studied it longer than I meant to. Maybe it had held something once. Maybe I was just tired. The driver had vanished when I set my duffel at the foot of the stairs. The only sound left was the hallway clock, ticking like it had someplace more important to be. The clock in the hallway ticked behind me as I moved toward the kitchen. Its light hit first, too bright for the hour, spilling across tile like it insisted someone stay awake. I stepped in without a sound. The plate left out was pushed to one side. Half a fried catfish, limp green beans, and a sweet potato mash that had congealed at the edges. No one had called me down. I pulled out my old chair, third from the left. It screeched across tile. Faces didn't budge. Mom was wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate circles. Dad had migrated back to his recliner, ESPN murmuring in the living room. She cut a look over her shoulder, then tipped her chin toward the dish. That's the last of it. I made the sweet potatoes the way Lana likes, extra marshmallows. I let the comment pass. The fork beside the plate was bent slightly at the tine, like someone had tried to pry open a can. I used it anyway. The fish tasted like flour and fridge air. Behind me, the iPad on the counter lit up, its ringtone chirpy and hollow. Mom's entire face changed. Eyebrows lifted, mouth softened. She dried her hands quickly on her apron and answered. Lana's face filled the screen. Too close at first, then adjusting with a practiced angle. She poured words into the room, sugar-wrapped and loud. "Hi, Mama. I'm at the tasting room. They brought out a Malbec flight just for us." I kept chewing. "Oh, honey, you look radiant," Mom said. "Turn the camera. Show me the table." The camera swiveled to reveal candles, wine glasses in rows, linen napkins folded into swans. Laughter in the background. Someone shouted Lana's name and she waved back before returning to the call. Then her eyes caught me. She tilted her head as if trying to place a familiar face. "Nadine? You're here. Got in this morning. You look tired." Everything okay? I didn't bother replying. We're finalizing table settings for the engagement party, she went on, already back in hostess mode. Could you help fold napkins? Remember those little origami cranes you used to make? You were so good at them, Mom nodded like it had already been decided. I stared at the iPad screen, her perfect teeth, the diamond glinting on her hand, the curated lighting behind her. None of it felt real. None of it included me. Sure, I said, my voice low but steady. She grinned. Great. Just make sure you don't wear the uniform this time. It's a party, not a military send-off. She let out a bright giggle. Mom echoed it with a small, eager chuckle. I kept my face still. When the call ended, Mom stood there a second longer, watching the black screen as if it might light up again. I stood, rinsed my plate in the sink, and dried it with the towel that always smelled faintly of pickles. Upstairs, my room had shrunk around the furniture I remembered. The air had that old carpet scent, musty, sun-drenched, and faintly floral. I opened my duffel bag and pulled out the dress blues I'd packed at the last minute, more out of habit than hope. The metals caught a thin line of lamplight before I folded them under an old sweater and slid the drawer shut. The uniform didn't belong here. Neither did I. My phone buzzed. Talia, you okay? 3 words. No emojis. No small talk. Just like her. When I was still in basic, she'd sent a handwritten card with cartoon stars and a stick figure version of me saluting. It was dumb and perfect. She was 13 then, maybe 14, the only one who ever asked what my base looked like, not how dangerous it was, just what color the sky turned before lights out, what the sand felt like in my boots. I texted back, "Still vertical." "You?" She replied with a red heart and a gif of a goat headbutting a wall. I caught myself smiling, the only one that day. Downstairs, I heard voices again. Lana's call must have resumed. Her words floated up the stairwell, filtered through speakerphone, carelessly clear. "And don't forget to tell her not to wear that uniform. It's not a funeral." No one corrected her. The room swallowed the comment whole. The silence after grew louder than the comment itself. I crossed the room and eased the door shut. A quiet click sealed it. Outside the window, rain tapped against the glass like someone too polite to knock hard. I didn't pull the blinds. The scent of starch still lingered on my palms. By morning, the rain had burned off, leaving only glare. The backyard buzzed with folding chairs, silver helium balloons tangling in the dogwood branches, and 2 teenage boys wrestling with a plastic arch that wouldn't stay upright. Someone shoved a clipboard into my hands before I reached the porch steps. "Can you double-check the tables and cross off what's done?" Someone called. I didn't catch who. The clipboard landed in my grip like a receipt for existing. My name was printed at the top of the page, lowercase and misspelled. Nadine, no rank, no last name. Just a stranger's version of me on a to-do list. I held on it a second longer than I should have. Rows of tasks. Tent install, check. Table layout, pending, sound test, 2 p.m. I tucked the board under my arm and walked out toward the lopsided tent, flapping gently in the breeze. A gust tugged the tablecloth, and I pinned it with a salt shaker. The linens were stiff, off-white, and smelled faintly like vinegar. Everything looked fine from afar, but up close I could see the creases no one had steamed out. Someone yelled for more duct tape. Another shouted about the flower delivery being late. I hadn't been asked to help. I'd been assigned. Footsteps clicked behind me, heels on patio stone. I didn't turn. "Need another hand?" Lana said, her words sliding in like honey edged with a knife. I looked over my shoulder. She was wearing a linen jumpsuit and wedge sandals that sank into the grass with every step. I stood up. "I've got it." She placed a cooler down, unnecessarily close to where I was crouching. "You've always been good at organizing things," she said. "Logistics and all that. This kind of work suits you. Like a suit I didn't pick." I managed a tight smile. "Make sure the tables aren't too close," she continued. "I don't want anyone tripping over centerpieces." Or you pulling something, before the big day?" Her eyes paused on my wrist, the one with the faint scar from an IED vibration fracture. She'd never asked about it. I shifted to another table and pretended to level its leg. The wind whipped again. This time, the seating chart taped to the last table corner fluttered loose. I grabbed it without thinking, fingers pinning it down before it took flight. Names. Dozens of names in delicate cursive, each one paired with a carefully selected label. Damien's cousin, best man. Lana's yoga instructor. CFO, Damien's firm, DJ's girlfriend. And then, in the bottom left corner, almost an afterthought, Nadine, sister, between the Conley's daughter and Table 9 overflow. Overflow. Like water that spills where it shouldn't. Like a mistake you mop up. I traced the word long enough to memorize each letter's shape. Lana's voice trailed off behind me, something about checking if the custom macarons had arrived. I kept it to myself. My fingers smoothed the edge of the chart. Another gust. The tablecloth snapped up like a sail, then dropped back down. A napkin went tumbling across the grass, and someone laughed. I didn't chase it. The clipboard still rode my palm as I wandered back toward the patio. I passed two women tying ribbons on folding chairs, chatting about a bachelorette brunch. One of them glanced up and offered a quick, distracted smile before returning to her task. Inside, through the sliding glass door, I saw Dad asleep in the recliner. Mom was on speakerphone talking to the florist. A box of name cards sat open beside her, each one nestled in crinkled tissue paper. I wasn't curious enough to look for mine. Back outside, Lana was posing for a candid shot, arms crossed, chin lifted, standing beneath the half-decorated arch, like she'd already won something. Damien snapped the photo with his phone, then kissed her temple without quite touching her skin. I slipped past them and headed for the side fence. My boots sunk a little into the damp soil near the rose beds. The breeze smelled of pine mulch and cheap candle wax from the citronella buckets staked near each table. The clipboard still rode my palm. I studied it again, at the way my name sat there in the wrong shape, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I thought about crossing it out, writing it properly, adding a title, a correction, anything. But I didn't. I let the clipboard rest gently on the edge of a crate and walked back toward the flapping tent, where another gust had already undone the last tablecloth I'd fixed. By the time I slid behind the wheel and pulled away from the tent, my palms still carried the starch of folded linens. I didn't stop until I'd parked 2 blocks from Broad and Willow. The cafe's windows breathed out the smell of old lilies and cinnamon, and I slipped inside before the morning turned humid. Inside, brick walls carried mismatched frames, and Edison bulbs washed the room in warm, syrupy light. The air carried cinnamon and roasted beans, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes in a way that felt like comfort. Talia was already at a window booth, stirring her coffee with one of those tiny metal spoons that cafes use when they want to feel rustic. She glanced up, tilted a small grin without standing. "I got your usual," she said, pushing a second mug toward the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure if you still take it black." "I do," I said, easing into the booth. The cushion hissed slightly beneath my weight. "Thanks." We sipped in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that came from two people who didn't need to fill it. Talia had grown into herself since the last time I saw her. Chin sharper, clothes softer, eyes just as watchful. Her hair was tied up in a loose knot, and there was a faint scar above her right brow I didn't remember. Life had touched her too, apparently. "So," she started. Voice casual but not careless, Talia asked, leaning in, "You still haven't told them you're a colonel." I huffed through my nose, the hint of a laugh that never formed. I did. Once, years ago. They heard Army and tuned out after that. Talia tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're telling me you walk into your parents' house in full dress blues and no one thinks to ask what the silver eagle on your chest means?" I rolled a shoulder. "I think they assume I run a desk." She rolled her eyes, then leaned forward. Well, for what it's worth, I think it's badass. Thanks. I traced the rim of my mug with a finger. The ceramic was chipped on one side. Another beat of quiet passed before she spoke again, this time more hesitantly. I wasn't going to bring this up. But Damien, I met her gaze. You know he had a security clearance issue last year, right? She asked. Got held up for months. Something flagged in the background check. I only know because my friend works in that division. I said. Talia watched me. The name on the form was Coulter. I held still, giving her nothing. The air between us shifted. Warmer now, heavier. You denied him clearance? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I followed the process, I replied, tone even. There were inconsistencies. That's all. Talia leaned back, coffee forgotten. Does Lana know? No. She blinked slowly. And you're just here. Letting her marry him? She makes her own choices. Talia exhaled sharply through her nose. Damn. I didn't respond. My eyes drifted to the window where the florist next door had propped open their door, letting the scent of wilted roses and eucalyptus waft through. Talia's voice dropped. That's a hell of a card to have in your pocket. I'm not playing anything, I said. Not yet. The corner of her mouth twitched. But you could. I could. We let the sentence hang until the steam thinned between our mugs. It wasn't revenge. The truth tucked away like a boot blade steadied me. A quiet edge. A choice no one knew you had. Lana's going to lose her mind if she ever finds out, Talia murmured. She won't, I said. Not from me. Still, Talia said, studying me, it explains a lot. Like what? Why she's always so desperate to be the center of attention, she said. Maybe deep down she knows she can't stand next to you without shrinking. I said nothing. The idea lingered in the steam rising between our mugs. After a while, Talia reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I found this when I moved last month, she said. You sent it to me when I turned 16. I slid it open. Inside was a folded note, scrawled in my own handwriting. Be louder than they expect you to be. She tilted a small grin. You told me that before I joined ROTC. I remember. I think you need to hear it again. I folded the note slowly, the paper soft from time and corners frayed. Then I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Outside, the florist's wind chime clattered once against the doorframe. The kitchen had always been narrow. Long counter, beige linoleum, cabinets painted a shade of white that never looked clean, no matter how much bleach Mom used. We stood side by side at the table, two women separated by decades and something deeper. Between us sat a cardboard box filled with folded cardstock, thin ribbon, a roll of floral stickers, and a pen with gold ink. She offered me the pen as a peace token. Your handwriting's the prettiest, she murmured, smoothing a sheet with her palm. You've always had a steady hand. I uncapped the pen and picked up the first name card. My wrist tensed. She added with a lightness I didn't buy, It's nice having you help. Lana's so busy, and you've always been so careful with things. I let it lie and wrote, Annette McGill. Next, Tomas, DJ's friend. Then, Lana's sorority sister, Cara, with a question mark in parentheses. Halfway through the stack, I pulled out my own card. The placeholder said Nadine. I blinked, thumb brushing over the misspelling. No one had corrected it. Again. I flipped the card over. The back was blank. I was thinking, I said, voice quiet. Maybe I could switch seats. Something a little farther from the kitchen door. Mom paused, eyes on the stove even though nothing was cooking. Oh, but your spot works best. It's close to the water pitchers and the extra forks. I wouldn't mind walking a few more steps, but it's easier this way. And I already told the caterers the head count per table. Changing now would confuse things. Of course, logistics over people, orders over comfort. She reached for another card, holding it delicately between two fingers like a pressed flower. You've always been so good with details. That's something I admire. Lana gets overwhelmed, but you don't complain." I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her that quiet wasn't the same as content. The back door creaked. Lana stepped in with her sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown. She carried a roll of twine and a list on floral stationery. "Oh, good," she said, breezing over. "You've started." "Mom, did you leave space for the welcome sign? I want that to be the first thing people see." "Yes, honey," Mom said, already adjusting the trays. Lana glanced at the cards in front of me. "Oh, let's move Kara next to Damien." They had such a great chat at the tasting, and Tasha should be on the other side of me. She's hilarious. She rattled off names, repositioning people as if they were place cards. I kept writing. She didn't look at me once. Then she hesitated. "Where's yours?" she asked. I held up the card I'd just written. In bold, deliberate strokes, Coulter, N. Her brow arched. "Going formal?" she asked with a smirk. "It's not a military banquet." "Guess I'm just used to it." "All right," she said, turning away, already on to the next thing. "Don't forget to fold them all the same way. We want it cohesive." She was halfway down the hall before my breath finally moved. Mom glanced sideways at my card but said nothing. She wiped her hands on her apron, then started stacking finished cards into neat piles, organized by table number. Outside, wind stirred the paper napkins still in their plastic wrap. Through the kitchen window, I saw the tent swaying slightly in the backyard. The white fabric fluttered like breath held too long. I turned the pen in my hand and picked up the last blank card. This time, I wrote the name slowly. Not Lana's, not Mom's, mine, and not the version they watered down or forgot how to spell. Coulter, N. I dotted the period like pressing a seal. When I looked up, Mom was watching me. Not the card, not my hand, but my face. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I held my ground. She placed the final stack into the box. "I'll go see if Lana needs anything," she said, already stepping away. I stayed at the table, gold pen resting in my palm, and stared at the quiet resistance lying in that folded card. A small, sharp name, mine, catching the kitchen light, waiting to be seen. I pushed back from the table, the gold pen still warm in my hand, and slipped through the back door. The hum of voices swelled first, then the sting of citronella candles, then the glare of string lights stretched across the yard. From a distance, it looked like a postcard. Smiling people in coordinated colors, glassware catching the glow, tables draped in soft linen. But up close, the air carried static you couldn't see, only feel. Lana stood near the arbor, elevated just enough to mimic a stage. Her clipboard tapped once against her palm. "All right, everyone," she beamed, spinning once for theatrical flair. "Tomorrow it all lands." I need everyone crisp. This wedding is going to be seamless. She swept her eyes across the group. I hovered at the edge, neither inside nor entirely outside the circle. Her eyes found mine. "Special thanks to Nadine," she called, voice warm but shaped like a blade. "My sister's basically our logistics commander. She's amazing at this stuff. Honestly, she was born to coordinate folding chairs." A polite ripple of chuckles. Tight. Safe. Then she added, "And just a reminder, we're keeping it soft and romantic tomorrow, not military chic. So let's leave the uniforms in the closet, okay?" Bigger laughter this time. A few eyes darted toward me before shifting away. I held still and watched her sip rosé as if nothing had landed. Damien didn't laugh. His arms were crossed, jaw set, but he didn't speak. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I threaded past the serving trays and buckets of melted ice, through the hedge near the back gate, found the rusted chair by the fence, half sunk into the soil, its legs uneven on the patchy grass, and sat. My spine protested. The laughter behind me faded into a blur of clinks and claps. I thumbed my phone open without lifting my eyes. The photo surfaced, the same one. taken just before our deployment ceremony last year. We were all in full blues, dirt under our boots, a storm rolling in behind the aircraft hangar. My squad was a mess, brilliant, exhausted, loud, and I'd never felt more certain of who I was. I didn't have to prove anything. I had to lead. I stared at that image like it held a secret I'd misplaced. A message slid across the screen. Talia, tomorrow, if you want me next to you, I'll be there. No punctuation, pure presence. I stared at the words, thumb hovering over the keyboard, but said nothing back. Knowing she'd offered was enough for now. A gust lifted the corner of a seating chart taped to a folding table. I stood and pinned it back down. My name was listed in lowercase, squeezed beside DJ's girlfriend and neighbor's daughter. A placeholder. A body with a name that meant nothing to the table arrangement algorithm Lana had crafted. Behind the catering tent, I eased through the screen door and headed upstairs to the guest room. My uniform hung in the closet, tucked in the far corner behind 3 peach-colored dresses. Still inside the plastic, but I could trace every metal, every pressed seam through the film. The garment bag whispered as I unzipped it halfway. My fingers grazed the lapel. I didn't move to take it out, not yet. I stood there, the synthetic bag rustling faintly in the silence. Downstairs, someone dropped a tray. A burst of laughter followed. Music shifted to a folksy cover of a love song I didn't recognize. I didn't belong there. Here didn't claim me either. The light in the room was dim, enough to catch my reflection in the closet mirror. Not in full, just fragments. Shoulder, chin, the edge of my brow. It struck me how ghost-like I looked in my own childhood home. A soft knock, 2 gentle taps, touched the door. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the window. From there, I saw Damien standing alone by the string lights, glass untouched in his hand. Lana flitted between guests like a hostess from a lifestyle magazine. I didn't know if Damien's silence earlier was guilt or discomfort, or something else entirely. I only knew it was the first moment anyone at that party hadn't laughed at me. My hand returned the uniform. I wouldn't wear it for them, and applause held no appeal. But maybe, just maybe, I needed to see myself in it again. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the collar, the scent of starch and cedar rising faintly from the fabric. There was no grand decision, only a quiet gathering of something sharp still forming. Chairs scraped faintly as guests settled, silverware chimed against china, and the first wave of champagne flutes arrived in glittering rows. Candlelight flickered over the table arrangements, hydrangeas rising so tall they carved the room into sections. Servers leaned between shoulders to set down folded menus and name cards in looping script, each framed with gold borders and a single white rose laid across the napkin. Mine was tucked in the far corner of the table, beside a portable heater, humming like an afterthought. A centerpiece blocked my view of half the room, a towering bouquet of hydrangeas and eucalyptus, placed just so. From my corner, Lana was hidden from view, but her voice carried cleanly through the tent. A tide of easy mirth moved through the tent, chimes of wine glasses, compliments about the decor, voices overlapping like a melody that had rehearsed itself without me. I adjusted the hem of my navy dress, tugging it once, then again before resting both hands on my lap. A server reached around the flower arrangement to set down a glass of champagne. He gave a brief nod, paused a beat, and drifted to the next place setting. I glanced at the menu card printed on thick cream stock, tucked beneath the silverware. Guest name, Nadine C. misspelled. Again. It wasn't new, but it struck differently now, like a paper cut that hit the same spot 3 times in a row. Across the table, a woman I didn't know was talking about her podcast. Someone else had brought their labradoodle and was showing pictures on their phone. I listened as one guest asked Damien if he'd be doing a choreographed first dance. He chuckled. "I'll follow Lana's lead, like I always do." The toast began. Lana rose, glass raised just above her shoulder, like a debutante rehearsed for the camera. I just want to say how lucky I am," she began, glowing beneath amber strands and low jazz. "To be surrounded by love, family, and the most thoughtful friends. This whole event, every flower, every flicker of candlelight is here because of people who care." She turned, made eye contact with each of her bridesmaids one by one, thanked the caterer, the event planner, even the guy who parked the rental trucks. "And of course," she added, with a playful tilt of her head, "to whoever folded those napkins with military precision, you've truly outdone yourself." Another ripple of chuckles skimmed the table, and a pair of curious glances slid my way. But only for a second. No one raised a glass. The joke landed, and like all her jokes, it did its job. Clever, casual, coated in frosting. I lifted the flute, let a flat sip touch my tongue, and returned it to the linen. The bubbles were already gone. The condensation from the glass left a faint circle on the menu. I stared at it, unsure if I wanted to blot it or leave it as a mark. The silverware gleamed next to my name, Nadine, like a stranger had been invited in my place. My gaze lifted toward the entrance. The night air beyond the tent was cooler than expected for September. Talia stood near the edge of the dance floor, her phone in hand, eyes flicking toward me every few minutes. She hadn't smiled since Lana's toast. Across the tent, my father leaned in to whisper something to my mother. She covered her mouth and laughed too quickly, her shoulders pulling up in that way she always did when trying to be discreet. Her eyes never met mine. I repositioned my chair as if a small pivot could lighten the pressure riding my spine. The heater beside me clanked once. No one else seemed to notice. Everything on my side of the table felt colder. Even the light seemed duller. I thumbed my phone and brought up the same photo, my unit at Fort Liberty, half in sunlight, half in shadow. It calmed me, the way muscle memory sometimes does. The clatter of silverware signaled the beginning of the first course. I hadn't noticed servers bringing plates until one arrived in front of me, salmon with beet puree and a fennel garnish. I stared at it, appetite vanishing like mist. Talia drifted behind me, her fingers grazing my shoulder, not stopping, not speaking, enough to say, "I see you." My fingertips grazed the edge of the name card once more. It wobbled under my touch, then flipped over. On the back was a small sticker, one of Lana's monograms, L and D forever in embossed gold. I set the card down face up again. I sat up straighter, not as a guest, not as someone's sister, not as Nadine. Across the room, Damien's gaze found mine. He offered no smile and he didn't break eye contact. Understanding settled. The air between us hadn't settled when a glass rang out, sharp, deliberate. Forks stilled mid-air. I caught Damien leaning forward, elbows pressed into the linen, wine circling in his glass like he meant to divine an answer from it. "So, Nadine," he said, tone casual but carrying, "what do you actually do on base?" I held my answer. The background music swelled, bland and cheerful, while a napkin drifted to the ground and someone cleared their throat. Before I could speak, Lana cut in. "She does paperwork," she chirped, not even glancing my way. "I mean, don't go picturing Mission Impossible or anything. She's great with systems, super detail-oriented." A thin, uneasy chuckle traveled the table, like they weren't sure if it was a joke or a dig. I set my fork down. "I'm a colonel." I said it evenly, without raising my tone. Still, the stillness around it felt like stepping into a church and realizing you're the only one who's not whispering. At first, no one moved. The playlist hummed and chairs rasped softly. Then Damien's head lifted. The smile on his face caught mid-formation. "Wait," he said. "Colonel?" His voice cracked slightly at the end. A woman 3 seats down repeated it, just above a whisper. "She said she's a colonel?" Another guest leaned in. "Like, the army?" I didn't clarify. I didn't nod. I didn't offer a resume. I simply met Damien's gaze, then let my eyes drift to Lana. Her mouth held in place. A A double blink betrayed the jolt. The shade of her lipstick suddenly looked too red against her skin. You never said that, she stammered, trying to laugh, but it faltered halfway. I didn't even know that was your rank. You never asked, I replied, reaching for my glass. My mother, seated 2 chairs away, stared at her plate like she could disappear into the mashed potatoes. My father took a sudden interest in the centerpiece. No one else spoke. It was one of those moments, terribly brief, terribly loud in its silence, when a table full of people realizes they've misjudged the room. Not just the tone, the entire layout. I didn't mean it like that, Lana rushed, tucking hair behind her ear. Of course I'm proud of you. We're all proud of you. Sure, I said, the word crisp enough to end the sentence and whatever came next. Across the table, someone reached for the wine bottle and poured themselves a little too much. The music continued to hum, as if the playlist hadn't been informed of the shift in atmosphere. 2 guests whispered about getting air by the hedges. One woman asked her husband if the babysitter had texted. Talia's eyes were on me, wide and unblinking. I could see the exact moment the corners of her mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like relief, maybe even reverence. Lana picked up her fork but didn't eat. Her voice dropped as she leaned toward me, just enough for only the nearest guests to hear. You didn't have to say it like that. I met her whisper with my own. No, I said. I really did. She flinched, barely, but I caught it. The tension didn't fully dissipate after that, but it stretched into something else. Thinner, more fragile. A few conversations sputtered back to life, mostly about weather and travel plans. People made a show of complimenting the food again. The music rose half a notch, as if the speakers were trying to patch a hole. But the air had changed. The place card in front of me still read, Nadine, untouched. But it didn't matter now. They'd heard me. The syllables clicked into the room like metal against glass. Colonel. Not just anything. Not a footnote. Not a napkin folder. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with the linen napkin and looked around, not for approval, not for permission, but to absorb it all. Their discomfort, their recalibration, their quiet realization that I'd never truly been invisible, just deliberately ignored. From somewhere near the back of the tent, a movement stirred. I didn't turn, but I knew it was Damien. Lana was still chewing, still pretending nothing had shifted. The shift had weight, and everyone was carrying a piece of it. Her chair scraped back with a screech far louder than it needed to be. Her heels clacked against the floor as she pushed herself upright, arms trembling at her sides. You waited until now? Her voice cracked like brittle glass. This whole time you planned to embarrass me in front of everyone. The room stilled. A lull between tracks left her words hanging. I kept my seat, hands easy on the linen, wine untouched. I didn't plan anything, I said calmly. I just stopped correcting you. She laughed, high and sharp, but there was no amusement in it, just panic wrapped in velvet. God, you're unbelievable. You act like you're better than all of us walking around with your silent little martyr act. Damien's voice cut across hers. Wait, he said, blinking as if waking from anesthesia. That clearance file last year, was that you? He fixed on me. His tone wasn't angry, only stunned. The kind of stunned that comes when a puzzle piece finally falls into place and the whole picture rearranges itself. I nodded once. I didn't know who you were to her. Your name came across my desk, and I followed protocol. It wasn't personal. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His brows pulled together like he was calculating time, sequence, consequence. Lana turned to him. You knew? I didn't, he said slowly, his eyes still on me. I only remembered the last name because it stalled everything. I didn't think it meant anything then. It didn't, I interjected. Not until now. The silence that followed hummed with voltage, the kind that fills a room after the fuse has been lit, but before the explosion. Lana's face contorted, not in grief, but in disbelief. Her hands hovered mid-air like she wanted to reach for something solid and couldn't find it. She scanned the room, hunting for a defender, but no one moved. They all watched. Heads turned slowly in her direction, then toward me, then back to her. She pressed her palms flat to the table. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up after years and... what? Claim some moral high ground because you've got a title now." "I didn't claim anything," I said. "You're the one who's been rewriting me." Her breath caught. "You told them I handled napkins. You told them I was just paper pushing on base. But you knew I stood, not towering, not threatening, refusing to stay small. You knew exactly who I was. And that scared you." Her lip quivered. "Because you wanted to be the star," I continued, "but you knew deep down the only way to shine was to dim me." She looked like she might speak, but the words wouldn't cooperate. Damien released a tight breath and sat back. He didn't touch his fork again, didn't look at her either. "You didn't need to lie," I added. "You could have told them everything and still had this party, this dress, this fiancé. But you chose to erase me first." The centerpiece seemed off-kilter, as if the weight in the room had moved. "I didn't erase you," she muttered. "You hung my photo in the garage, Lana," I said. The gasp from our mother was audible, sharp like she'd been slapped with a cold hand. I wasn't supposed to know that, I wasn't supposed to say it. But the air had already cracked open. The room didn't erupt, no shouting, no glass breaking, just the low creak of 1,000 quiet reckonings, layered one on top of the next. Our father stood, made a vague gesture toward the hallway, then exited without a word. Someone near the back adjusted their chair, clearly debating whether to stay or flee. I didn't move. The band eased in, tentative, as if waiting for their cue. I sliced the chicken breast slowly, methodically. The taste was flat, but I chewed anyway. After that, I pushed back my chair. The silence around the table clung to me long after I stood. No one said a word as I stepped away, weaving through the maze of half-finished meals, blinking fairy lights, and startled glances. I didn't look back. Inside the house, the hallway felt colder. I moved with a purpose I hadn't accessed in years, like the ground beneath me had suddenly remembered who I was. My garment bag hung behind the coat closet, exactly where I'd left it that first day. I unzipped it, fingers steady, then drew out the uniform, pressed, precise, untouched, since my last formal ceremony. The deep blue fabric caught the hallway light. My nameplate gleamed. The metal ribbons sat in neat, hard-earned rows. I changed quickly, sliding each arm through the jacket sleeves, buttoning from the bottom up. I pinned the last clasp over my heart and let the silence settle on my shoulders, heavier than any combat gear I'd worn. But it didn't crush me. It centered me. From the foyer mirror, a reflection met me I hadn't seen in years. Not the version I sent home for Christmas cards, not the blurred figure in old family photos. This was me, whole, visible, undeniable. I opened the door and stepped into the night. The garden was buzzing, a storm of whispering voices and sidelong stares. Somewhere near the champagne bar, a plate clattered to the ground. Conversations dropped like dominoes, one by one, until the only sound was the soft crunch of my shoes across the stone pathway. I stepped under the canopy lights. They cast a warm glow like late summer dusk, wrapping everything in something almost sacred. I moved at an unhurried pace, taking up my full height. A guest by the dessert table gasped, "Colonel Coulter!" I couldn't place the voice, and it didn't matter. The ripple had already begun. My mother took a step toward me, eyes wide, voice barely above a hush. "Nadine, what are you doing?" I halted beside her. She reached for my arm, but I gently sidestepped it. "You always said not to make a scene," I said quietly. "Don't worry, I'm not." Her lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. I kept walking. The music had died again, this time without fanfare. Even the staff stood still, holding trays mid-air, unsure where to look. Lana's back was to me. She stood near the head table, arms folded tight across her chest. Damien had moved away, hands shoved into his pockets, jaw clenched. I stopped at the center of the garden, the aisle marked for tomorrow and flanked by rows of white chairs. I turned to face them all. "If anyone asks where I went," I said, my voice carrying without strain, "tell them the woman you put beside the DJ's girlfriend was the same one who helped coordinate the Kabul evacuation." A ripple moved through the crowd, disbelief, then recognition. Murmurs stirred. Someone near the back clapped once before awkwardly stopping. I neither smiled nor waited for permission. "This isn't a scene," I added, eyes moving across the guests, some still holding forks mid-air. "This is a correction." Lana stared at me like she no longer recognized the shape of her own story. I turned toward the gate. No storming, no slam doors. I was leaving with the dignity I had carried for years and the silence I'd finally chosen to break. But before I reached the path, a small voice cut through the tension. "Colonel," someone called. It was a man I didn't know, mid-40s, gray at the temples, holding his son's hand. "Thank you for your service." Others began to echo it. "Thank you. Thank you, ma'am." A woman near the edge steadied her palm against her collarbone. A few stood, uncertain at first, then more joined. It wasn't dramatic, it was reverent. I answered with a small incline of my head and moved on. Not because I was modest, but because I didn't need their validation. I already knew who I was. As I passed by the hedges, I caught sight of Talia, eyes shining, a proud smile ghosting across her lips. She stayed silent and lifted the smallest acknowledgement, as if to say, "Finally." And I kept walking, past the hedges, past the murmurs, until the porch light pulled me back toward the house. I didn't expect anyone to follow me back inside, but footsteps rustled behind me anyway, soft, hesitant, like they didn't know whether to flee or chase. I didn't look over my shoulder. The hallway held a cooler draft, even though nothing had changed. Same chandelier swaying slightly in the air, same framed paintings lining the corridor, mostly landscapes, mostly meaningless. Except now, the air carried something sharper than silence, something like accountability. When I entered the dining room, heads turned in a slow chain, not dramatically, not all at once, but as if gravity had shifted, pulling their attention toward the one person they hadn't seen properly in years. Lana was slumped at the far end of the table, both hands clutched around the base of a wine glass she hadn't touched. Her posture no longer screamed confidence. It sagged. Her skin had gone pale under the soft overhead lights, drained of the pink warmth she always chased with makeup. Damien stood behind her, but not close. His hands hung by his sides, uncertain, as if they'd been instructed to comfort her and had decided against it at the last second. I passed them both without pause. Mom hovered near the kitchen pass-through, a dish towel in one hand, an unwashed wine glass in the other. Her fingers shook just enough to betray her. When she caught my eye, she lowered her head and began rubbing the same dry glass again and again, like if she polished it long enough, maybe time itself would rewind. Dad wasn't even visible. Either he'd gone upstairs or melted into the wallpaper. I halted at the main dining table, beside the half-empty flutes. That damn name card still sat face down near my empty plate. Someone had flipped it at some point, maybe in guilt, maybe in embarrassment. Maybe they'd hoped I wouldn't see it again, but I saw it. I picked it up and turned it over. Nadine C. Still in that bubbly, over-flourished handwriting my mother loved to use for place settings, still pretending to be elegant, even when it erased me. I set the card upright in front of the plate. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my dress uniform and drew out my real name tag, the one I wore every day at the base, engraved, unmisspelled, unflinching. Coulter, Command Operations. The weight of the metal made a soft, definite sound against the wood as I placed it gently on top of the card. Not to crush it, not to hide it, to mark where I stood. A hush slid across the room. Still no one spoke. Not Lana, not Damien, not my mother. But they all watched. Not out of respect. No, not yet, but out of something adjacent. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of it. Their approval had nothing to do with what I carried in here. But I did need to see it. Their understanding that I had been here the whole time. Talia stepped forward from somewhere behind the buffet table, moving with that quiet surety she always carried. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She came to stand in front of me and reached for my collar. Her fingers, steady as ever, adjusted a slightly crooked insignia I hadn't noticed. She smoothed the fabric with care, then looked at me. Really looked. Her eyes said it all. "You've done enough." I let a breath go. Not from exhaustion or relief, but from a decade of pressure unwinding under my ribs. Something finally gave way. No clapping, no soundtrack, just a room full of people pretending the world hadn't tilted on its axis. Behind me, a chair scraped as someone stood. Lana. She walked toward the hallway, not even glancing at me, her heels silent against the floorboards. Damien didn't follow. His attention lingered on the name tag, then flicked to me, then dropped altogether. He didn't move. I watched Lana disappear around the corner. For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar twist in my stomach that usually followed her exit. I didn't wonder what she'd say next, or what the family would whisper about me once she recovered her composure, because this time, there was nothing left to defend. I turned back toward the table. The flowers were still perfectly arranged, the champagne flute still half full, but the room was no longer hosting a celebration. It was sitting in the aftermath of a story they hadn't bothered to learn until now. I straightened my shoulders, not to tower, but to stand in my own skin. Then I turned toward the hallway, letting the murmur fade behind me until the kitchen came back into view. Same faded wallpaper curling at the corners, and the fridge's hum that still made the light flicker when it kicked on. Even the clock above the stove ticked with that faint mechanical wheeze it had made since I was a teenager, sneaking spoonfuls of peanut butter at midnight. I sat at the small round table, the leg still chipped despite my dad's promises. The room was dark, except for the amber glow cast by the stove lamp overhead, pooling soft light across the table and barely touching the floor. In front of me sat a plastic takeout container. My name wasn't on it, but my mother's handwriting was. A neat label stretched across the top in blue pen, chicken and rice. No onions, with no onions underlined twice. That detail stopped me. The underlined onions. She remembered I hated them. Still hated them. After everything, after the place cards, the ignored titles, the airbrushed erasure, she'd remembered that, but instead of saying something, she'd written it, sealed it in Tupperware, and left it for me to find like a breadcrumb. I left the lid closed. It sat beside my glass of water. I didn't have the appetite, and even if I had, something told me this wasn't a meal. It was a message, one I wasn't ready to reply to. Behind me, the wall of family photos remained intact. Lana's high school graduation, the Christmas trip to Hilton Head, her engagement shoot in the sunflower field I never even knew they visited. Not a single one of me. It ought to have stung. Strangely, it didn't. Because tonight, that absence didn't carry the same weight. It didn't erase what had happened under the tent, or the uniform I now wore without apology, or the silence that had rippled across an entire table the moment I spoke. That wall was curated. My life wasn't. My phone lit beside the chicken and rice. One notification glowed across the screen. Talia, Defense Weekly, page 5. I printed it and pinned it on the rec board at work. Thought some folks should see it. A grin spread before I noticed it. I imagined her, sharp and unapologetic, walking up to the corkboard in her building's lobby and tacking it right between Help Wanted and Potluck this Friday. I could almost hear her voice. Let them read it. The kitchen door eased open on whispering hinges. I turned slightly. My father stood in the doorway. Just his silhouette at first, lit from behind by the hallway sconce. His arms were at his sides, and he didn't enter. He hovered on the edge like someone not sure they were welcome. A strange reversal. His eyes dropped to the uniform I hadn't yet taken off. "You look different in that," he said. Not a compliment, just a statement, cautious. I met his gaze. "That's because this is me." The part of me this house never chose to hang on that wall. We stayed like that for a beat. The clock above the stove clicked once, then again, marking time we never took when it mattered. He drew a breath and let it out. "Your mother. She worries people will talk." My mouth twisted slightly. Not a smirk, not anger, just recognition. "Applause isn't the point," I said. It came out quieter than I expected, but it landed. He didn't argue, just shifted his weight, looked down, then slowly backed away into the hallway. No further words, no emotional breakthrough, just space. And maybe that was all there'd ever be. I stayed a moment longer. The room was softer than before. Not warm exactly, but clear. The way air feels after a storm finally pulls through and the static lifts. I reached for the duffel at my feet, stood, slipped the phone into my jacket pocket, and left the container where it was. The front door gave as I opened it, and the night met me, quiet, wide, and open. A breeze rolled through the screen door, brushing my sleeve. I didn't ask if I was allowed to leave. I didn't wonder if someone would chase me to say goodbye, because I didn't need their permission anymore. Not to walk out, not to belong, not to be. I used to think that silence kept the peace, that if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, maybe one day they'd finally see me. But sometimes, choosing yourself means stepping into the light, not to be praised, not to prove a point, but simply because you deserve to exist fully, without explanation. Have you ever been the invisible one at your own family's table? If this story stirred something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. Subscribe to the channel, because some stories, like some people, just need to be heard.